Shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and today I'd like to talk about the importance of understanding the ministry of Yeshua the Messiah in context. Today we're witnessing something very incredible happening throughout the entire world. It's a movement of the Spirit as people are being stirred in their spirits. They're being awoken from their slumber. They're recognizing their past, their historical past, their spiritual past, and their spiritual roots, and they're coming out of paganism and following truth. Now, some refer to this as the Hebrew roots movement. I'm not one to really like to put labels on things because there's all sorts of people with differing beliefs in the Hebrew roots movement, but I think it is a pretty good description because people are recognizing that their faith doesn't come from Rome. It doesn't come from the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Christianity. It actually is a deeper, more ancient faith that comes from the Hebrew Abram, later renamed Abraham. So Hebrew roots is a pretty good label if you're going to use one, but of course it doesn't necessarily represent a unified movement. And so what you see is a lot of pushback coming from Christians. They're trying to claim that these people are just becoming Jewish, and they're straying from their faith, and they're becoming Judaizers and all that. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth, and that just simply comes from ignorance. Ignorance because they don't understand the context of Yeshua's life in the Hebrew context. You see, Yeshua was a Hebrew, and he was from the tribe of Judah, and he followed the Torah, which many Christians refer to as the law, and everything he did was consistent with the Torah of Moses and consistent with the covenant path. But again, I just heard recently a Christian radio show. I listened to part of it, and after I realized they didn't even know what they were talking about, I stopped listening. But it was just born out of ignorance, and they're trying to defend their Christian beliefs, which deny really the Torah and the Hebrew roots of their faith, and of course that's just simply incorrect. So Hebrew roots people are trying to find the truth. They're trying to put their faith into its proper context, and of course understanding the ministry of the Messiah is very important if we were to understand what he was actually accomplishing. And so we were just on the Passover 2017 tour, and I thought there was a little fraction of his ministry that we essentially walked out. We had the pleasure of actually having the same day sequence as the last days of Yeshua before he was crucified and later resurrected. So we were kind of following through his footsteps in real time. And it was very interesting when we see Yeshua coming in from Jericho to Bethany. Now, Bethany was called Beth Anya. It was the house of the poor, the house of the impoverished, and it was a place where sick people were, lame people were, lepers, outcasts. It was outside of the jurisdiction of Jerusalem, so it was essentially outside the gates, and that's where many people who were unclean or in a sickly condition would stay. And there's tradition that the Essenes actually had a house for the poor there. And pilgrims coming in from the Jordan River Valley would actually, donate, give money to the poor there. And probably the most significant thing that happened there was when Yeshua resurrected Lazarus, Elazar. So it became a place known for resurrection and healing. And Yeshua later actually ate at Simon the leper's house in Bethany. And of course, it's probably very clear that he healed the leper there, Simon the leper, and probably many others. So it's very significant to know that not only did he come in there, but he stayed in Bethany every night. So Bethany was a place known for resurrection, healing, and it was essentially the home base for Yeshua before his crucifixion and later resurrection. Now, it's very interesting. After he came the first night to Bethany, he then went on to Bethpage. And let me just read a portion of Matthew 21. Now when they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethpage at the Mount of Olives, then Yeshua sent 2 disciples, saying to them, Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me." And essentially, Yeshua then got on the donkey and rode into Jerusalem in what is known as the triumphal entry. And the significance of him selecting a donkey at Bethpage can't be overlooked, but you have to understand the Hebrew context. You see, the kings of Judah would always ride on a donkey. It was a symbol of their humility, and we know from the Torah that kings were not supposed to accumulate horses as Pharaoh did. They were supposed to ride on a donkey to just show that the king was supposed to be a servant and a humble position. So Yeshua selecting a donkey was representing him riding it as a king. And we know that that was in fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah. But it's even more significant when we realize that he got the donkey from Bethpage, because Bethpage it has extreme significance. It actually means house of unripened figs. And let me read you just a little bit of the history of Bethpage, according to Ernest L. Martin. The village of Bethpage on the Mount of Olives was a most important religious center for the Jewish authorities in the period of the Messiah and the apostles. It was a walled village, which was the only area outside the walls and camp of Jerusalem that was considered by the Sanhedrin to be an official part of the city of Jerusalem. In this village was one of two seats of the great Sanhedrin of 71 members. The prime seat of the Sanhedrin was in the temple at the Chamber of Hewn Stones, located just to the south and east of the altar of burnt offering. The other was at this walled village of Bethpage, located just east of the western summit of the Mount of Olives. There were specific decisions of the Sanhedrin that were reserved for determination only at this official seat of the court in Bethpage. Those were decisions affecting what were the limits of the camp of Israel around the city of Jerusalem, and this included where the red heifer could be burnt. This also embraced what districts surrounding Jerusalem were to be reckoned as inside the city. This also included what were to be the dimensions of the temple, and this is also where death sentences for rebellious leaders of the nation, as shown in Devarim 17:8 through 13, were validated. So this is a very significant location. It was a seat of authority for the Sanhedrin. And we know that Yeshua was constantly coming against the religious authorities of the day. He was calling them hypocrites. He said that the Pharisees, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, you'll by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. So he was basically saying these people had built a fence around the Torah. They'd built their own religious system. They were putting their own commandments and traditions over the commandments of Elohim. And as a result, they weren't going to get into the kingdom. And that's a very powerful and profound statement that he was making. And as a result, they wanted to kill him for that. So he goes to the seat of authority. He gets the donkey that he would ride in to Jerusalem, proclaiming that he's king. So he's essentially showing that they don't have the authority. He has the authority. In fact, he's going to ride in on a donkey from Bethpage. Now, the following Shabbat, that was on a Friday that he made his triumphal entry. Then he spent Shabbat at Bethany. And again, he returned from Jerusalem to Bethany every night. He would go back and forth from Jerusalem to Bethany, that place of the resurrection, that place of healing, that place of anointing. In fact, he was anointed twice in Bethany before his crucifixion. Again, and by being anointed with oil, that is Mashiach in Hebrew, Messiah. It was representing his messiahship there and resurrection there. Now, the following Sunday, he then walks from Bethany past Bethpage and into Jerusalem. And while he's at Bethpage, we read that he did something very profound. He cursed this fig tree. Now, anybody that knows Jerusalem during Passover, again, within its Hebrew context, knows that figs are not ripe at this time. So what was he doing cursing this fig tree because it didn't have any ripe fruit? Well, again, Bethpage means house of unripened figs. And so we see some incredible significance there. He'd already given a parable about the fig tree previously in Luke 13:6-9. He also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, "Look, for 3 years I've come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground?" But he answered and said to him, "Sir, let it alone for this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that you can cut it down." Now again, this doesn't mean too much unless we understand the Hebrew context of it. You see, the house of Judah was likened to figs. When the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem, Jeremiah was told that the good figs were the ones who were taken and exiled into Babylon, and the bad figs were the ones that remained in Jerusalem. So this was already after the house of Israel had been taken and captured by the Assyrians and completely removed from the land, leaving only the house of Judah in the land. And so the good fruits were the ones taken to Babylon, the bad fruits were the ones that remained. Ultimately, after the 70-year exile, the good fruits who were in Babylon, some of them, the good figs, some of them came back. And those are the ones who we see there presently in the time of Yeshua. And they had obviously created their own religious system, and Yeshua was there trying to fertilize them, trying to dig around the ground, fertilize the ground, see if he could bring some good fruit out of these people who were not bearing fruit. So Jeremiah had already showed us that the figs and the fig tree was the house of Judah. Yeshua was there walking by the house of unripened figs, Bethpage, and he cursed the fig tree. We read about his cursing of the fig tree in Matthew 21:18. Now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it but leaves, and said to it, "Let no fruit grow on you ever again." Immediately the fig tree withered away, and when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How did the fig tree wither away so soon?" So now when we understand this in its proper Hebrew context, we see that Yeshua was cursing this fig tree. He was cursing the house of Judah. He was saying, "You're not bearing fruit, and so you're not going to bear any fruit in the future either." And the next day we read about him again. After that he went to Jerusalem. He went back to Bethany, and then the next day they passed by. They saw it, and they marveled at how the fig tree had withered. And of course, on that following day is when he basically goes to the temple. He gives the prophecy in the temple of how it would be destroyed. He then leaves the temple, goes up to the Mount of Olives. He gives what is known as the Olivet Discourse. Again, he tells his disciples that no stone will be left unturned. It's all going to be wiped out. And they ask him for, when is this going to happen? And he tells them certain signs that, again, many Christians apply to the end of the age, but most of those things that he said were applicable to 70 CE, when the temple was in fact destroyed as he had told them that would happen. So again, we can't even understand the Olivet Discourse unless we understand history and the proper context of what Yeshua was doing. He'd cursed the fig tree. He'd wept over Jerusalem in Luke 19:41. He said, "Now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, 'If you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, and close you in on every side, and level you, and your children within you, to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation.'" So again, Yeshua was specifically focusing on the fig tree, the house of Judah, the temple that they had built and was the center of their activity. Just like in the days of Jeremiah, they marveled at the temple, and they thought everything surrounded around the temple, and they missed the very Messiah who was there with them at that time. And so he declared judgment upon them. And this can all be seen through his actions before his crucifixion. And only can we understand these things and the significance of his actions when we understand the true Hebrew roots of our faith, the Hebrew context of our faith, and the Hebrew context of Yeshua's first coming. And of course, we'll never understand his second coming unless we understand the true Hebrew context of what he's accomplishing through his second coming also. And that will be the regathering of the whole house of Israel. You see, the house of Judah and the house of Israel were divided. He came to the house of Judah. They missed him. They rejected him. They killed him. He cursed them and he declared judgment on them. But his next coming will involve a regathering of the whole house of Israel. So that's just some of the context of the life of Yeshua. In the Walk in Light series, book 5, entitled The Messiah, it's a very, very well-detailed book involving the Hebrew context of the Messiah's life, death, resurrection, and future fulfillment of the feast of Elohim. I'd encourage you to get it if you don't understand his Hebrew roots and the Hebrew context of his ministry, and it'll help you understand the Hebrew roots of your faith. This is not something that needs to be attacked. This is not something that Christians need to be afraid of. I think a lot of Christians feel threatened by the Hebrew roots movement because they don't understand it. It's simply trying to get to the truth. It's simply trying to strip away all the centuries and layers of tradition that have been built around the Messiah and around the faith. It's trying to get down to the original context of the faith and his ministry. So I'd encourage you to check out the book, The Messiah, and our other books that we have in the Walk in Light series. You can find them at www.shemayisrael.net. I hope you learned something from this teaching. Check out our other teachings that we have on our website and also on our YouTube channel. Till next time, this is Todd Bennett. Shalom.